At special town meeting, will we have true citizen representation?
Or a rubber stamp for bureaucracy? I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Caroline Maycumber.
And I'm Greg Richards, and we are the Unselects. Today, we're going to go through Fall Town Meeting. We're going to go through all the articles and kind of give our recommendation. You know, all the other committees in town seem to do it, so I figured, why can't we? So we're going to go through the entire warrant. We're going to take some time to dive into some things, and our goal here is to really educate, you know, some of the town meeting members, hopefully, that are watching, and the community. And we're going to go into some of the articles and some nuances that may not be obvious of why some articles are done, why are they being brought to town meeting. Because one of the things we talked about before, the last time you joined us, Caroline, was sometimes it's not very clear as to what the intent of an article was, right? What's really behind it? Why is it being brought? Right. And that's what we want to take some time today to do. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So plan is we're going to go through these articles. We're going to listen to Kevin Mizikar explain them to the select board and then kind of have a little dialogue about what our thoughts are. So Article 1 is about the 300th anniversary, which, those who don't know, Shrewsbury was founded in 1727. So therefore, the 300th anniversary would be in 2027, so 2 years from now. So let's take a listen.
The first article there is to provide an appropriation to the 300th Anniversary Committee that actually restricts any money that we put in there into that special fund until the year prior to the event. We need to make this supplemental appropriation. We're targeting $15,000 to get the committee off and running before they can use the funds that are set aside statutorily.
Well, so I don't know about you, but I'm in support of this, right? We already have appropriated some funds that we can't use until 2026. And I know that to secure certain vendors or other pieces of the celebration, we kind of need to give some money out in advance. So to me, it's a relatively small threshold here, $15,000. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm supporting it. I think it's a good plan, and the committee needs to get moving.
Yep, agreed. I mean, it's reasonable to expect that they might need down payments for certain things, and yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on. These are easy so far. Trust me, it'll get better. Article 2, let's take a listen.
So we do need to make some adjustments to the fiscal year 2025 budget. We have the funding to do this because of additional revenues that have been identified as the state's budget was passed in July, and the assessors worked diligently to get new growth certified for us, which is higher than we originally anticipated.
Okay, one thing I want to highlight, because I think I want to take a little deep dive here. Hopefully we can try to explain this as simple as possible. He mentioned getting new growth certified from the assessor. Okay, so we are going to go into what that really means, because I didn't know until I started looking at it. But I think everybody probably at home has heard of Proposition 2.5, right? We've done overrides here in Shrewsbury, the last one in 2021 about it. And what that limits is a town can only increase your tax burden, so the actual dollars you're paying in taxes, by 2.5% a year. That's by statute, right? Limited. However, that does not include what they call new growth, right? So one of the things there's actually a couple of things that make up new growth, but the primary driver we'll kind of dig into. But I want to show a slide quick. And this is an eye chart a little bit, but there's a few numbers on here that I want to highlight. These are the FYI. If you didn't know, there's actually over $8 billion of property that's taxed within Shrewsbury. That's like the total number, and it's kind of broken down: commercial, residential, etc. And the new growth that he's talking about, or Kevin Mizikar mentioned, is over $111 million. So what they're saying is that new building, existing buildings that were improved, land that might have been subdivided, those are all the things that went into that bucket that added up to $111 million of new property value that could be taxed. The biggest bucket, of course, is residential. And so I really want to take a little sidebar here off of this slide and talk amongst ourselves about that. So have you ever had a project done at your house that required a building permit?
In Shrewsbury, no.
I have, sure.
Okay, as part of that process, you go get a building permit. When you go to the town and you close out the permit, what typically happens next?
Well, the assessor will show up at your house.
Yes, they do. Yes, it did happen to me. I did a pool project, the same thing. And I thought, well, that's interesting how they show up so quickly. That is new growth. So what they're able to do is if you go and get a building permit and improve your property, that increase to you as a taxpayer can happen immediately. So that 2.5% that you've paid in addition to what you paid the prior year now goes up above that because you spent money on your own home and now your home is valued higher. So that's why you see that process, because the quicker that they can get certified new value, the sooner they can get more money into our budget. Okay? The part that I wanted to talk a little bit about is holistically, right? The reason for it is there should be incremental cost to a town. Typically, hey, if I build a new house, there's school costs, and a new development could be road costs, police, fire. However, if we're built out so far and there's not a lot of new like single family houses and other things going on, do we need that extra money as a town?
We shouldn't.
Are costs going up higher?
There's no costs that are hitting. A good example would be if Caroline decides to build a deck in her back because she likes the deck. It improves the value of her house.
Yep.
Sure.
It added no extra cost to schools, to police. I guess you could argue maybe to fire if it caught on fire, but very, very small
It depends
opportunity
who's
there.
grilling on
Right?
said deck.
But yeah, it's not adding incremental cost to the town.
Right. So I'm not averse to, obviously I support the fact that we have to move money around in a budget, but I just think it's important for people to understand what drives some of this behind the scenes and what the state does, right? Or even towns do, right? Where they have kind of an insatiable appetite for revenue, right? And really the only people they have to go after primarily are existing residents, because we saw that kind of how the mix was. So just a FYI to the viewers out there. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated financially. All right, we're going to move on to 3, which talks a little bit about buying some additional capital assets for the town. So let's take a listen.
Article 3, we're proposing to make some capital improvement investments. These are 2 vehicles within the public safety departments at this time, one in the fire department and one in the police department.
Okay, new fire truck, new police car. Actually, not a fire truck. I don't know what kind of vehicle it is. Didn't specify. Are you supporting the new vehicles, Brian?
I am supporting the new vehicles. Obviously, we keep building things in town, so we do probably need more vehicles.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue I probably hear too many sirens. I feel like lately, I don't know if it's the Centec Boulevard station's been getting busier, but they need their vehicles to do their job right. So I would still probably have questions at town meeting about why new ones are needed. Like, did an old one break down? Is it because the population has grown? I still want to know
What
why.
is the vehicle?
Yeah, what is the vehicle? And is it because another one broke? Or is it something we never had previously?
Sure.
But yeah, in general, I'm 100% supportive of what we need for public safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fair. All right, moving on. Article 4.
Article 4 is new and was not previously identified, but as Mr. Snowden and his team is working through the finalization of the revenues and the expenditure obligations, and in consideration of the board's ongoing request that we limit annual spending within the caps that are provided, we have the opportunity to place additional funds into the override stabilization fund.
Okay, this goes back to Proposition 2.5 again, which is why I wanted to talk about it. The Override Stabilization Fund was established in 2021 at the last override, which allows us, the purpose of it is where you can have some additional money that's supposed to prevent us from needing an additional override vote within a certain time period, right? So I'm always in support of that. The longer we can delay the need to go back to the voters to ask for an override, the better. Fair?
Agreed.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Article 5, moving right along.
Article 5 is the appropriation of funding that we receive through the TNC transportation network companies. This is Uber and Lyft. Every time a ride originates in Shrewsbury, we get 10 cents. We'll be appropriating about $6,400 from fiscal year 21, $9,800 from fiscal year 22, and about $13,700 from fiscal year 23 from those ride origination fees.
I didn't know this, but apparently we get 10 cents per ride for Uber and Lyft.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Keeps
Hey.
going up if you notice too. A
Yeah.
lot more people taking them.
Yeah, which actually is a pretty big number because you think about $13,000 in a fiscal year at 10 cents a ride. That's actually a lot more rides than I thought.
Yeah.
Even though I know it's not, overall a huge amount of money, but that's good. And,
Yeah.
that we're actually getting that. And,
And it's like free money.
well, yeah, it's utilizing it to offset some additional costs that
Yep.
we wouldn't be able to provide. So support of accepting the money there.
Yes.
I think.
Give us the money.
We'll take it.
Okay, now we're going to move into something with a little bit more teeth. Article 6, I think we're going to spend a lot more time on. Article 6, specifically about funding for the new DPW project and town hall. So let's take a listen to the actual article itself, and we'll definitely be talking a lot more about this one.
Article 6 is an article we talked a lot about at your last meeting. What we're requesting here is the appropriations of fund for continued design work. So there's not a borrowing authorization. We have funds on hand that we want to dedicate, mature and evolve the designs, and then come back in the spring having a really solid understanding of cost, scope, and features associated with those two projects. Again, leveraging two projects at one time will give us the opportunity to alleviate space concerns here at the town hall, provide modern Department of Public Works facilities, and really save costs in the long run and not have to put an addition on this building.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to talk about first is they're combining two projects, like they mentioned. Combining a new DPW building and a town hall renovation. Thoughts on that?
Personally, I don't understand the connection. I understand there's a little bit of a connection, but it seems to me that it should be two separate considerations, right? So, you're doing a TPW. Okay, let's vote on that. We want to renovate the town hall. Let's vote on that. I understand. I think what Kevin is saying is that it's a cleaner way to kind of do it. But to me, in a town, we should actually be looking at things as an expenditure individually to make the decision. Some people may say, yeah, DPW, awesome, great. But I don't know if we want to do the design of both at the same time in one vote.
Caroline?
My question is always why? Why, right? So
Yeah.
what's wrong with the DPW garage? I know they did tours all summer. Do we really have that many trucks that are unhoused in the garages? I would want to know the specifics in more detail about why are we doing this? And then for the town hall, I look at, yes, of course, we want everyone that works there to work comfortably, but then I always bring it back to the schools. And I'm sitting here thinking, my gosh, Sherwood, Oak, Floral, there are still lots of schools in town that don't even have air conditioning. And if I remember correctly, part of the town hall improvements they were looking to do was improvements to the HVAC.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I just think maybe there's some other public buildings in town, like the schools that are full of hundreds and hundreds of children on the third floor with no AC and 90-degree September weather. I feel like those funds could maybe be better used in other places because there's not that many people working at town hall compared to some of the school bit.
And this is a design exercise to start.
Yeah.
Correct.
But
there is a nuance, right? Yeah, the nuance is correct. Like you mentioned, Brian, it is. The article is to approve the design of money we have for the design. So we have the funds, right?
Yeah.
The issue is that you start spending money on something, it's really hard to go back out of it later, right? So it's like you throw bad money after good, as you say. Like, so if you get into something far enough, right, you get to a point in time where like, I'm going in no matter what, even if I'm throwing more and more money because I can't. If we spend a couple $1 million on a design, can you really say, well, we just wasted $2 million on a design and we never built anything?
right.
So I think it's important, or at least the discussion should be, before we go through this whole design process, are we all aligned that at the end of this, right, we need to get money? Now, I'm not trying to simplify this because I understand you have to go get money from the residents in the community. We have to figure out how much it costs. The only way to figure out how much it's going to cost is to do somewhat of a design to actually figure out what a budget would be, right?
Yeah.
So we're kind of in a little pickle there, I think, of trying to separate that. But the other part we also talked about is having two separate buildings. It is more difficult for the town to go and get multiple votes, right, for multiple projects. But if they're both important and that important, I think the onus should be on the town to come and ask the voters specifically to say, you want to pay for this? Yes or no? You want to pay for this? Yes or no, right? The problem is you see this all over at the federal level, right? You just take a big bill, you throw a bunch of stuff in it,
Yeah.
Right.
you pass it once, everybody's happy. It's the lazy way to do
Yeah,
it.
this is the mini omnibus question,
Yes.
right?
A very
Well,
mini.
if we throw it in together, we don't have to deal with it separately. But the reality is, don't be lazy. The voters, in this case, the town meeting members,
Right.
should look at something, even a design, and say, we're not ready for, to your point, town hall, a little extravagant maybe.
Yeah.
But DBW, looking at the details, maybe we do need it. Let's get an estimate.
Yeah.
Sure. So let's take a little listen to more details behind the scope of this, because the town is going to explain for both projects what the potential cost would be and kind of what's involved. So let's take a quick listen.
Starting with the full amount, the 32.5 million. This is broken out by the 27 million from the South Street garage design through the work of the MFOC committee. And then right now, a conservative estimate for town hall of 5.5 million. Now, if we were to break these two projects up a little bit further, starting with the DPW garage, that's going to be funded about 16.2 million through the utilities and 10.8 million through the general fund.
Okay. It's a lot of money.
It is.
And actually, if you look how it's supposed to be paid for, because that's kind of important to come up to the next slide on the timeline, at least that they talk about. So utility cost means you're going to be paying more. Every resident will pay more through the utility bills, right, to support that project. Plus, there's also an additional $10 million and the $5 million, which is over $16 million, that has to get funded through a potential debt exclusion, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a second. So it's a big investment for both. And I think we should be able to go into some detail on each one, as you mentioned, Caroline, about what are the importance, how do we prioritize, is this something that we should be supporting? Can we support it? Can the residents handle that? So on and so forth. Fair? So let's listen to how this timeline is going to vet itself out, because I think this is another interesting kind of topic on how we actually go through and approve such a thing.
Slide here helps provide a project timeline for the DPW garage and town hall feasibility and design project. Step one here is the special town meeting. The article requests 60% of the design cost to be funded with available resources, to then move to a special town meeting in April of 25, requesting a borrowing authorization less the design cost previously appropriated in the this special town meeting. Then there would be a ballot question in May 2025 for a possible debt exclusion for the general fund portion of this project, which is about 16.3 million. And then construction would begin on the South Street portion of this project in August 2025.
That seems fast.
Yes.
It
Really
seems like
fast.
it's already been planned and signed, sealed, delivered. I'm sitting here thinking, my gosh, that's less than a year from now.
Yes. And that's, I think, the reason, if you looked at that too, the mechanisms the town is using to get this through in that timeline, to me, is a little bit interesting. So if you notice there, typically our annual town meeting is when? It's in
Yeah,
May.
Exactly.
But usually the end of May. So in order to get this financing, or at least approving, let's say, to allocate the funding, they have to do a special town meeting in April, so that you can get on the ballot in early May. You can actually go to the voters on the debt exclusion vote. And for those of you who don't know, we're going to go back to the Prop 2.5 here, is a debt exclusion, right, is essentially just like a Prop 2.5 override vote, except it actually has a fixed duration, right? So what do I mean by that? Just to help clarify. So when you do a Prop 2.5, you're increasing above that threshold. So your taxes for a given year, right, you'll increase more than 2.5%.
Right.
Now that new rate will then increase 2.5% from there on. So forever, that never goes away. So you're increasing that forever. For debt exclusion, they're increasing it, and they're allocating a portion of that to pay for these buildings. And over a period of time, I think when I saw some of the charts, something like 13 years, or I might be wrong, but it's around 13 years, that you'll pay incrementally more in taxes, but then that will go away once the debt is paid off. Mm-hmm. So it's like a temporary override, but over a 13-year period.
Yeah, and everybody gets assessed.
And everybody gets assessed. So that is a little bit of a different to pay for that additional $10 million that they talked about. So in order to squeeze in the timeline, we have to do a special town meeting. Then we have to actually go on the ballot and vote on it. And then they can start construction. So they are kind of cramming it. And part of it says if you're at 60% is what we're voting on for the design work in November, you have to be pretty far along the process, to your point, to actually say, hey, yeah, we think we can start construction next August. So I don't know if there's a better way around that timing or
Well, one of the issues, is that a townwide vote?
yes, it's on the ballot.
And it's in May.
In May, on the
Yeah,
May
when you
election.
put them on in May, the people that tend to go out are the people that say yes. There's a reason why a lot of these types of initiatives are thrown into spring, especially, they actually know they're going to have a very low turnout.
Yeah, typically, I think the last one, as we know, when we ran our write-in campaigns,
Yeah.
right? There was like a 6%
Yeah,
turnout.
super low turnout.
Super
And that's
low.
when you want something to pass, because the people that are most motivated at that point are actually the yes, not the no vote.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of people are motivated. I know, potentially some seniors or people who might be on some fixed incomes where
Yeah.
that increase to their property tax bill is a significant impact.
Yeah.
And I think they should come out and they should vote. And I think the town should try to justify to those voters why this is a valid use of their money. Like, why should each person be burdened to pay for this? How is it benefiting each resident of Shrewsbury?
But put that on a general election ballot,
Right.
Yeah.
and they generally lose.
Right.
So that's something I'd love to figure out how to do, to be honest. Put it on a general election ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think if it get voted down, right, I think technically you could bring it back up. I don't know if there's rules around
Yeah.
when you can and can't bring something back up. So I guess for me, just in summary on 6, I would like to see the town split it out, have a vote on DPW, have a vote on the town hall. I mean, that's kind of my thought. I mean, you already have the funds allocated. So to say, yes, should we use the money we've already allocated to pay for a design? Probably, but we also probably should make sure that what you're designing will get approved by the town before you keep spending more money on that.
Yeah, my recommendation, I would vote no on this, because I'd say I'd rather see it split. And if they
Okay.
can in town meeting split it, I don't know, you can make, fine. Let's split this. Then maybe yes on DPW, no on town. I don't know, right? But I think I would let the people decide then.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement.
Okay, so there's 6. All right, on to 7.
Article 7 is accepting a section of the general laws to allow for expanded investments in our trust funds that we hold on behalf of the town or for particular purposes. This allows us to invest those trust funds in what's known as the prudent investor rule. Otherwise, we're very, very limited to what's called the legal list and very restrictive investments. So this gives us a broader opportunity to make funds with still very risk-adverse portfolio. Think about the other post-employment benefits, or OPEB trust being our largest trust fund. It has essentially a 30-year or longer target because we're investing for future retirees' health insurance benefits. So allowing those funds to grow over time means that we have the ability to take advantage of market conditions and lower the out-of-pocket costs for taxpayers in satisfying those obligations.
So anytime you can potentially lower the obligation to taxpayers, I'm always in support of that. So essentially, the way I kind of understand this, and I'm no financial guru by any means, but we can use better investments that potentially will outperform and give us a better return, meaning that the money available to spend on those obligations will be higher, thus requiring less from the taxpayer.
Exactly. So this is kind of my area of expertise. And so essentially what they're saying is the actuaries for the pension plan, right, are looking at it and saying, based upon the people retiring in a certain time span, this is the amount of revenue that you would need coming out of the plan to pay those benefits that are promised. If you were to invest it a little bit more aggressively, maybe, more in some balanced mutual funds versus, typical bond kind of money market type instruments, you're going to have that opportunity to outpace inflation. You're going to have more growth over time. So there'll be less of a need to fund it with actual dollars coming in from the town. So that investment growth will offset the necessary expenditures to that account. So yeah, I mean, from the outset, I feel like this would be a kind of a no-brainer for me to say yes.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Yeah.
3 yeses on this one.
Yeah.
All right. On to 8.
Article 8 is making adjustments to the personnel bylaw. Human Resources Director Christina Ordung was, again, in your last meeting, talked a lot about this. These are changes to various aspects of our benefits system to come in better compliance with our federal obligations and to be more competitive with not only other government entities, but the private sector as we recruit and retain employees.
Okay. I actually listened to them explain this in a lot more detail. There's a lot more under the hood. There's talk about vacation time, additional vacation time off, family medical leave. And I'm honestly fully in support of this. I know because in the private sector, I know benefits have changed a lot. There's a lot more options, especially Massachusetts, when it comes to sick time and so on and so forth. So I have no issues with them more aligning, because in reality, I would like to honestly see people who have experience in the private sector try to become, public sector employees, because I think there's a huge need, because people have a lot more viewpoints. There's a lot of talented people out there that I'd love to see actually working for the town and help in areas that we may not have the best people in today, right? So having those types of benefit programs is, you kind of have to have that to recruit.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, but also putting on my taxpayer hat, I also, anytime I hear more competitive from anyone in town government right now, I think, what's the cost? Are you looking to increase salaries? Like, give me the nuts and bolts, right? If it's, hey, to be more competitive in the private sector, most employers offer a high deductible health plan these days with an HSA. By more competitive, do we mean you're getting kind of like a Cadillac PPO type plan for town employees? Are we looking at higher salary bands? So I would really want to know a little bit more about the nuts and bolts, just because to me, more competitive feels a little bit vague. So I would want to know some more specifics before I would definitely say yes. But at a high level, in general, yes, I want to see it be competitive, because I do want the town to attract people that are experienced and actually want to be there to do the job that they're, applying for. So
Are the town's employees pensioned? Right, they have a pension.
Certain ones. I don't know if every single one does. I
teachers
don't know.
do, but that's through the
Yeah.
The only
MPA.
reason I ask is, again, that's a benefit that most private sector employees don't have.
Correct.
Right. So that's to your point. I just want to know. I'm not necessarily against it, but I love the questioning of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what the cost, and it's a very valid point, Caroline, that,
Yeah.
okay, is there a cost to the taxpayers for this new plan, or is it just that we need to do, modify something, its language to allow us to
Yeah.
go down a different path? But from what I recall, I don't know
Like,
that
to
there
your
was
point,
a
if
big
it's just
cost impact.
Sick leave, vacation time, things like that. Sure,
Fine.
by all means,
Okay.
A soft yes.
Soft.
a soft yes. Yes.
That's a tentative, like maybe. It's a hard maybe. So now we're going to move on to one of my favorite articles. Actually, the next two I think are going to get a lot more dialogue here, and the next one is 9, which is around MBTA zoning, which we have talked about many episodes, but going to give everybody an update and kind of go through a few different areas and I think different angles to the article. So let's take a listen to this one.
Article 9, which is MBTA community zoning compliance. There's ongoing public hearings. The next one is Thursday night at the planning board. That will be their final public hearing, and they'll be voting to make a recommendation thereafter.
Okay. The first bone of contention I have is I did attend both the planning board hearings. There were a bunch of changes they made to the zoning bylaw, proposed zoning bylaw, because of the feedback from the community, which I appreciated. The fact that they listened to those who were in attendance and made changes accordingly. However, that bylaw has not been posted. At least I couldn't find it. I did email, as they say, I sent a note for comment and have not heard back. So I did email asking for a copy of it. And I'm hoping that that is something that people can look at well in advance, because in that bylaw, right, the language is really what guides certain provisions that, I had some challenges with. And one of the main ones, which I want to take a dive into here, is not specifically related to the 3A MBTA piece, but it's related to something else that's happened in town. And I want to talk about it because it was not mentioned. And I think a lot of people in town would be curious about it. So let's take a look at this first. in the zoning bylaw. So when you approve this article, it's really a lot of zoning language. The first point in this, and this is off of that actual proposed plan, they're changing a definition of vertical mixed use for mixed use development. And their proposal is what's underlined, is changing some language. Now, this has nothing to do with MBTA, and I know what it has to do with, and I'm going to tell everybody, because a community member brought this to my attention, and when I learned about it, it made me a little upset. Because what this is about, it's about Beal. It is not about 3A compliance. And let me explain how this is about Beal. In the Beal project, the Beal Commons, this goes back to the application in 2022 we're talking about. There was a special permit required as part of the project for a mixed-use development, which was vertical mixed use, with has 9 or more residential units. Okay, fine and well. I know, like, it's still not really clear as to what this has to do with the MBTA article. Well, I'll try to explain it here. The existing language of what's there today and what was there when the planning board made the Beal decision states that a vertical mixed use development is the integration of commercial and multifamily residential uses in a single structure, which residential uses are located above the ground floor. So very clear. Mm-hmm. So if you look at that, typically what that is you have commercial properties like stores, restaurants, whatever, and then there's people living above it. Clear as what the ground floor is, right? Residential uses are above it. What they want to change is, well, we're only going to identify that to say that residential uses are on any one exterior exposure. And one would say, well, why would they do that? Well, let me explain. In the court documents of Beal, if you're not aware, currently Beal is under litigation.
Right.
Residents had sued the planning board, because that's who you have to sue as part of the town, and the developer, saying that they improperly approved special permits. One of those provisions, this isn't the whole case, but one of the key provisions is the vertical mixed use. So if you look at, this is the slide that I'm showing, is from the plaintiff's brief, post-trial brief, in which it says, the project cannot be purported vertical mixed use project because it does not comply with the bylaw, right? Which we said, we showed you what that looked like. Furthermore, essentially saying that you can't make up and change the bylaw at whim. The town can't do and say, here's what vertical mixed use means. It's in your bylaw. What they would have to do, number 1 and 2 there, is create a new definition inside of the town center district. Won't get into the detail there. Or they need to amend the general definition of the bylaws and eliminate prohibition on residential units on the ground floor. And the defendants did neither. So let's look at the plans again, just for the Beal project. The top is what was on Main Street, where you see the commercial property and residences above. The bottom is Haskell Street. What do you see on the ground floor of Haskell Street elevation there on the bottom?
Looks like apartments.
Looks like front doors of residences, right? Furthermore, if you go to the ground and first floor plan, this is all from the actual plans from site plan review. This is ground and first floor. It clearly shows residential uses. And what I'm showing in the top left in quotes is what our bylaw says. Residential uses are located above ground floor. Would this meet or not meet the bylaw?
It would not.
It does not meet the bylaw. So, to be clear, the town, without disclosing or mentioning to anybody at the planning board hearings, which I was at, is trying to modify a bylaw because of an ongoing court case without being transparent to residents.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do here is, regardless of if the outcome of that case, if the court says you violated, you weren't allowed to do a special permit, and they say that the residents win the case, they simply now, if this gets implemented, take the same exact plan, go back to the planning board and say, hey, we now have a new definition of vertical mixed use.
It was voted on.
It's voted on.
Yep.
Now we can actually just pass this plan back through as is, and the residents who spent all the money in to fight the town and had concerns are now screwed over once again.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do this and you think it's important, you should come out and explain to residents why you're doing it and be open and honest as what the reason is.
Well, where's the transparency, right? What I'd love to know is who recommended the person Who recommended changing that definition? Who was it?
I don't know.
Right. None of us know. Why? Because it was not done in a
Transparent.
public manner.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is something I think we have to push back on is who did it? Was it an attorney for the town? That's fine. I mean, attorneys are allowed to make, recommendations, right? But who? This is the question I have. And why did nobody, you caught it, but I don't think most people caught this.
No, nobody would, because they're not going to understand, well, oh, big deal, it's a change in zoning language. What is the impact? And this goes back to, you should articulate the impact of why you're doing something.
Yep.
So this was a big one I found, and hopefully it'll be brought up in the finance committee hearings, because there is a few before we get to a town meeting. But anyway, I digress. Back from Beal, back to MBTA. I wanted to bring up kind of a dialogue around the Supreme Judicial Court case, because a lot of people are aware on October 7th, there was a case between Milton and the state. The Attorney General of Massachusetts sued Milton for noncompliance of MBTA 3A. That case was heard. A lot of people, and actually other towns, are taking the fact that the SJC is hearing this case and saying, maybe we'll wait on actually pushing through this bylaw and zoning change, because if the SJC says part of it, some of it, all of it isn't legal, why are we going to push through and implement zoning laws that we don't have to do, right? Because it's not something really we want to do. So I think it's important. Let's listen to some of the arguments. And what I'm really going to show is when the Attorney General's office or their lawyer was in front of the court, what questions the justices were asking. And based off that, let's have a little bit more dialogue. So let's take a listen.
How is it that you're not, in this case, actually trying to take on the right of the residents of Milton to exercise their franchise?
Select people would have to ignore their town charter?
I'm sorry, the charter?
Well, the referendum to take it to the vote. You saying they would have to ignore it?
So you acknowledge that the EOHLC didn't put together the small business impact statement that was required under the statute?
That's correct. The HLC didn't do the small business impact statement.
Additional funding sources that the agency sort of added on that they would take into consideration, is that something that they can do? Can the agency do that?
Where does the deadline come from?
The deadline comes from the guidelines.
The point at which Milton, in your view, violated the statute was when it didn't enact a zoning plan by a certain date. But if the certain date only comes from the guidelines and the guidelines need to be done over, then what is there to enforce against Milton?
So if the guidelines were improperly promulgated, because in fact they are regulations, I think the answer to Justice Wilder-Hojan's question is that this case must be dismissed.
Interesting. Because if you hear, if you listen to the Attorney General or the governor talk about this, they say, oh, everybody's on board with this. And yeah, this is just this minor case. And I have to disagree. If you listen to the questions by the justices, very good questions, there's a key theme there, right? It's this concept of guidelines versus regulations. So where we're really at here is that there's a process. If you impose regulations, you have to go through public hearing. You have to go through the APA process. And what that does is it allows for fiscal impacts to the community, small business impact studies. You have to get feedback from people about what the impact is. And they just decided, well, we'll just call them guidelines so we don't have to do that. So that's the important part of this to me is I still struggle to understand why we as a community are trying to continue on this path to implement this when we can simply wait. They said 120 to 130 days from that hearing is when they'll make a decision. That means like February.
Yep.
What possibly is going to happen between November 18th and February that is so critical that we get this passed?
Yeah, I think you brought up over 20 towns have voted no. A lot of towns have postponed. I think the number has risen. Recently,
Yes.
there were a few votes in some pretty major towns that voted no. primarily because of that SJC argument. I think people are waking up to it. But I think when I went to the planning board, somebody on the board said, well, if it doesn't go, if the SJC said these guidelines were never promulgated correctly, there's no harm, no foul. My argument is, no, there is, because you still zoned something, and still you went through this process without being considerate and waiting for the decision. It won't hurt us to wait. Now they'll say, well, I know we're going to go through a little bit, but the various grants and so on. But no, because everything is sort of on hold while the court makes its decision.
Right.
I think we all agree to that.
Right.
I think even the AG is not doing anything against towns at the moment because they have to wait.
Right.
Well, technically, other reason is towns are technically not out of compliance until the end of December.
Right.
Because of the guidelines,
Yep.
which, as the justices stated, are improper, which means that guideline is the date is null and void. But I do want to go back to a point you made, Brian. I think it's really important. You mentioned that somebody on the planning board said, well, so what? We'll go back to town meeting and reverse it. Here's the biggest problem with that. Number one, the threshold is now 2/3 of town meeting. And number two, who has to approve every change and approve every town meeting vote? The Attorney General.
Yeah.
And if the Attorney General says, no, this is valid law, this statute's there, do you think that the Attorney General is going to approve you reversing the law that they love? No way.
No.
They're going to say, no, we're not going to reverse it. So they're going to disenfranchise, which is what they also said there about our ability to make our own decisions. And they're not going to allow us to reverse the law.
Yeah.
Right.
We're already scheduling a special town meeting for April where we could add this again back in. The Supreme Judicial Court would have made a ruling by that point. Let's wait until then. Vote no now.
Yeah.
Wait until the SJC comes up with what the actual legal ability of the legislature and the AG and the EOHLC is. And then we move forward from there.
100%.
Yeah, I think, the big thing, I would encourage everybody to watch these hearings. They actually are quite interesting if you're sort of a legal geek, But, I think the key thing that came out of that was the state was trying to remove the ability of townspeople to vote on something. That was consistent questioning from multiple justices. Well, why would you even let the towns vote if the law was somehow telling them they shouldn't vote? Right? So because the guidelines weren't promulgated correctly, that's why. But it comes down to, this is what we're at now. We as Shrewsbury should say no to this because we don't have enough information. We don't know what's going to happen. It's bad for the town. Many other towns believe that, but we're still rushing. Right. The town will tell you, well, we're going to be delayed. We're not. We're still rushing the decision. We don't need to.
And the other piece, which you mentioned, I think we'll touch upon the grant. We were awarded a housing choice grant of $500,000 for a design of a connector road between Green and South Street.
Yeah.
I struggle to see, how does it cost $500,000 to design a connector road? We talked about it in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
It costs us $1 million to pave or repave a mile of road, right? So I don't know how long that is. I'd bet you it's not even a half a mile to connect those roads. Maybe it is. I don't know. We could build the road for $500,000. We're going to design it for $500,000. And it states that it's to support Route 20 widening and a proposed 40B development, right? That's supposedly a friendly 40B. We couldn't negotiate with that 40B and say, you know what, if you want to do this, let's come up with a plan together to add that road and do it. So to me, obviously I can't prove this. This is all speculation. The only reason we were awarded that grant was to encourage and force compliance by Shrewsbury. Because now they can come and say, well, look, $500,000, you don't want to give it up. But I go back to, I think, what you had said, Caroline. I don't see the state changing or from November until, let's say, February, pulling that money for design for us over a non-compliance when there's an active case in front of the SJC.
I agree.
Right.
So I think I'm going to go to one more clip on this, but, I just encourage everybody just to say vote no. I mean, this is a continued overreach that if we don't start standing up as residents of communities and pushing back on these broad brush mandates from other higher ups, whether it's the state or federal, where are we going to continue to be? I mean, there's a point in time where we say, I've had enough.
Yeah.
I'm done with this, right? Let's let this go through the process, wait it out, and
still potentially fight it,
yes,
Right.
right? We just should not roll over to
No.
be exactly like,
No.
you know, a town that a Boston bureaucrat thinks is fabulous, right?
Right.
We are not those towns. We don't
Right.
have to be a town that's just like an adjacency to Boston.
right. So the other problem with the guidelines is that they can change them at any time. The OHLC can. And one of the things I want to go to a clip that we'll listen to it. I can't prove it, but I'm going to listen to something and we'll talk a little bit about it here from a planning board hearing.
I am assuming that at some point in the near future, you're going to be looking for other areas for map amendments. I just think that you're going to have additional growth and additional mandates. I'm assuming there will be other areas potentially that may be designated as 3A.
He may not know what he's talking about. However, his wife was the lieutenant governor of the state and does have political connections. They may know something that we don't. There could be future mandates coming that they're ready to push through that we just don't know about, right? So I always question that to say, contractual law, Brian, as an attorney, each side has to, you can't have a valid contract with coercion or distress, correct?
Correct.
So why would we ever sign a contract in which we get no benefit and it could change at any time?
It's called an adhesion contract, right? You can't. It's you know there has to be a benefit, right? There has to be consideration and an offer and so on. In this case, he might have slipped up. He might just be talking off the cuff, which is highly likely, right? I don't know. But to your point, he is Mr. Karen Polito, so he does sort of know, maybe know more. Maybe he slipped up. I don't know. But I do question it because what he does have is a lot of experience in this area. And he's probably saying out loud what he knows is going to happen regardless, right? Not a dumb man. Probably saying, look, you know, we all know they got it through once. They're going to do it to us again. He's probably not wrong.
Right. So definitely a no on MBTA. Moving on to the next one, Article 10.
Article 10 is also new to this list. It is a citizen's petition that has been duly certified by the town clerk, containing a request to change how the planning board is selected within the town of Shrewsbury.
Okay, in full disclosure, I may or may not be the lead petitioner on this. However, I will give a little background because I think it's important. I did not start this. We did mention it. If you go back to episode 7, we mentioned it in our episode regarding Holliston and the elected versus appointed boards. We said we could go to an elected board. However, there was a town meeting member who actually, as part of this process, went to the select board and recommended that they bring an article to town meeting about an elected versus appointed planning board during one of their open office hours. The select board chose not to move that forward or not to bring that up. So we, or he, I should say, had told them that we're probably going to do a citizen's petition, which ultimately is what we did. There was other personal reasons that prohibited him from continuing that process. So he asked me to kind of take it over. So I did. And one of the things to note is the threshold of signatures on a citizen's petition at a special town meeting is 100 versus 10 at a normal. And we did submit over 185 signatures for this to get on the article. All right. So I do want to go through a little bit why I think this is important. I want to get your opinions on this as well. But if you go back to it, I start at the town has articulated that the 2030 plan is important. Being engaged and connected, right? It's one of the key tenets. One of the strategies they show for that is expanding interest and engagement with Shrewsbury's boards and committees. What better way to have interest and engagement than allow any member of the community to run for an elected position? Correct?
Yeah.
So I always look at this and say, when in doubt, right, would you rather have appointed officials or elected officials? Just in general.
Elected.
elected.
And why would that be?
They are beholden to the people rather than beholden to a bureaucrat or an appointed official.
Yeah, 100% agreement.
Right. And, you know, when it comes to the planning board, one thing of note is that there was a survey done, I think in 2018, of like 146 towns that have actual planners. And they found that 70% of communities have elected planning boards. Only 30% have appointed. So we're in the minority. Not only that, almost every one of our surrounding communities has an elected board. Northborough, Southborough, Westborough, Grafton, Millbury, West Boylston. All of those are elected boards. We are totally an outlier in this case. And I think it also, when I think about what crafts the character of a community, what are those things? In my mind, it's what types of buildings are built, where are your parks, do you have open space, do you not? Do you want to have a lot of commercial development or industrial, or you want to make it more rural? All that's by planning. So why wouldn't you have an elected planning board who is able to not necessarily make decisions on that, because you still have zoning laws to follow, but they should be the ones, like we mentioned in that episode, crafting and coming up with ways to make zoning bylaws a better match of what the community wants for the character. Fair?
Yeah. And I think if you look at the history that we've gone through, Shrewsbury has grown not necessarily in a good way compared to those other towns with a lot of development. Oftentimes, now we have Route 9, we have Route 20 coming through. You can say those should be development zones or somehow to do that, right? But I think that should have been up to the people, not appointed folks who generally are very developer friendly, oftentimes have worked for development corporations, and have we've talked about this in another episode. It's not that they have an ill will, it's what they know,
Right.
right? If I'm a developer and I know development, I'm going to be pro-development.
Right. And I'm going to go to a clip here, is you get a lot of staleness on these appointed boards. People stay on there a long time and really don't have anybody to be beholden to, right? So there's no way to necessarily get the people out if you want to change.
Very little comment in these.
Right.
We've gone to plenty. Very little comment going
So let's
on.
take a listen to one of our current planning board members' response to having this on the warrant.
We're not the town council. I'm appointed. I'm not elected. I know there's
I'm sorry, sir.
yeah, I'm not. I know there's a citizens. I mean, there's a initiative petition to have the planning board elected. So be it. I'd be happy to cede my position after 26 years potentially.
26 years on the planning board.
Yeah.
Rhodolicus. He said he'd be happy to cede his position, which I don't believe, because if that was true, I know
He would
that
have ceded his position.
he would have ceded his position, because there was plenty of people who've applied who haven't been put on that would be happy to take the seat, right? So I think that's part of the problem. The other clip I want to go to here too is on the concept of representation of the community and being in the community's best interest. This was actually from the most recent one of the planning board hearings on MBTA. So let's take a listen.
Why are we allowing through special permit to exceed these maximum, which all this is based upon as far as what we're articulating as net new units and so forth?
So in terms of the special permit and allowing greater than 15 units per acre by special permit, and then allow that special permit use for the board to consider projects at higher densities. What that does is it gives the flexibility for the community to evaluate through this process, through the planning board process, any project at higher densities if it's, if it meets the community needs.
From my perspective, let's say maybe somebody from the community, I would say, well, we should cap it and not allow it, because we don't know, right? And today, currently, we don't have the ability to elect the planning board. So the people who are on the planning board are appointed, right? So the community doesn't necessarily have control of that process today.
Very well said.
Yeah. He kept saying the community. He doesn't mean the community, by the way. He means the people in that room that are appointed. That's to him.
I want to be in the room where it happens.
Right. Exactly. That's to him the community. Yeah. And it's not. It's an appointed planning board, and they know that it's sort of fixed in their behavior, in lean towards what they want.
Right, and that was the point I was trying to make,
Yep.
that the use of the term community, it's not what they think it is. It's when you say community, we don't have a say because we can't change the makeup of that board who has control over the special permits because we don't have the ability to elect them today. That was the point I was making. So the last piece on this, and we'll move past Article 10, is back to one of the warehouse projects because I think it's important. Clip we showed before about kind of a belief system that the appointed board has. So let's take a quick listen.
The board does not have to, is not required to continue to have public input after the board thinks that it has enough information for it to make a decision. We wish we had the power that everybody thinks we have, but we don't. So I think we're making our best effort to do what we can to address the issues that were raised within the confines of the law.
As we saw in another one of our other episodes, we showed how I think was it Sherborne? It was Holliston.
Holliston, yeah.
Holliston made sure that they acted within the law by getting good advice from their attorney and denied a similar project. And that's because they are elected by the people and they listen to the people and they respond to the people. And their first thought is to the people, not to, I've been here forever and I can do what I want.
Right.
Yeah. They actually utilized town meeting in Holliston, like we talked about, to modify zoning bylaws to prevent projects they didn't want in town legally. Whereas in Shrewsbury, we like to bring in developers to allow them to put articles on town meeting to allow them to get favorable zoning conditions so they can build big projects, right? Developers speak here, residents speak there. And that's what we're trying to change through this process.
Yeah.
And that to me, I mean, that is a huge problem. Developers should not be in a position to put an article on a town meeting warrant. They are not residents of the town. To me, that's an atrocity. That should not ever happen. I don't know.
I agree. So we're definitely a yes, I think, on Article 10.
This is 100% yes.
This is a big yes.
I don't see how you could vote against it, to be quite frank.
And then maybe it's a snowball effect because there are a number of other appointed positions, probably too many.
No.
Yeah, well, I think we'll start with a single victory and we can move on from there, as they say. So the last articles we're going to put together, these are the community preservation articles, so let's take a listen about those.
Article 11, 12, 13, and 14 are all Community Preservation Committee sponsored items. 3 of those include investments and studies in the First Congregational Church. And the final is a historic gravestone restoration project, adding funds that weren't available in the spring but necessary to complete the full scope of work.
Okay, we're going to do a real quick overview of the Community Preservation Committee, just as a reminder. So their budget is approved at town meeting, the standard town meeting. We get about $1 million a year in funds, and that was we voted on this as a community to be part of it. And so there is a small piece of your annual tax bill that goes towards community preservation. Then they take and they divide those funds into 3 buckets, where they have buckets for historic resources, community housing, and then the open space and recreation. So when he mentioned about the gravestone project, they had used all their historic money up prior year, and so they needed additional funds. So that's why they're saying, hey, we want to allocate that. So that one we're not going to talk about, fully support of that. However, the other projects that were put on here about the First Congregational Church, there's 3. One for lightning protection, one for some trim work, and one for an architectural study. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the nuances about the Congregational Church. So what you are allowed to spend community preservation funds on, we talked about it there, but just to give a little bit more detail, those buckets we talked about: open space, historic, recreational, housing, and then whether you can, acquire it, create it, preserve it, or support it. There's just kind of a little matrix here that shows what you can and can't spend money on. So most things you can do, right? It's hard to create historic things. I mean, I guess that's kind of a common sense one there. It's like, you really have to put, they're like, well, you can't make a 400-year-old building, right? It's kind of difficult. But other than that, I think it kind of makes sense. So nothing really major there. One of the things I think I've heard a comment on about it is, that is a church, the Congregational Church. I know it's a symbolic to Shrewsbury. It's on the seal and whatnot. But it is a church, and some people may say, hey, wait a minute, I thought there was this separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Can you spend money on that kind of thing? Well, the answer is yes, you can, right? And it was really, there was a SJC case, Kaplan versus Acton, specifically on community preservation funds. So I'll just try to simplify this. You don't need to read it. It's an eye chart. But the way it breaks down is, it's a historic building. You can use it for the exterior of the building, to protect the exterior of the building, or parts that are not directly used for religious services. So one project, I think this was Northampton, that got denied, is they wanted to spend money on an organ. Well, the only use of the organ is for the service. So therefore they said, well, you can't spend it on that because that's purely for religious uses. Another one, I think in Acton, actually was around using money to rehabilitate stained glass windows that were religious in nature, and they said you can't do that. So you can, as a historic building, protect that building, just can't use it for things only directly beneficial to the religious service itself. So I did look that up, so we won't go into more detail on that, but I thought good for people to know.
Yeah, excellent.
All right, lightning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a Spencer, I think, had a town fire.
They did.
The church burned down, hit by lightning.
Historic church.
So that kind of triggered this whole piece about, well, maybe we have a problem with lightning, or maybe we have a risk that we should address. When you go for community preservation funds, there is an application, and I'm going to show the application, and I want to talk about it as well, for the lightning from the church. So there's a project goal, and then it describes a little bit of your budget. So the goal is, well, and there's a lot of spelling errors in this. This is not mine. This is how it's submitted. Provide protection during lightning storms is the goal, right? And the beneficiaries would be the town of Shrewsbury, and all community members will benefit from the project, right? So essentially saying, we're trying to prevent the building. If something might happen, it might burn down at some point in the future from lightning. Now, the other part it says is, if we don't give you the money, then what happens? And it says, well, if we don't have money, it won't be funded because we don't have any funding available. And none of our volunteers know how to install lightning protection anyway, so we don't have the ability to fund it. Now, my question is this, right? I'm not averse to looking at this, but if I own a building, whose responsibility is it to ensure that it's protected, or if there's a massive risk? If it's that important, do you not allocate your own money to pay for it?
Yeah, it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you purchase insurance for that hazard.
Right.
Well, I guess
it's likely it's not insurable to the level it needs to because it's a historic building.
True.
So it's hard to recreate. I own a historic home in town,
That's right.
and my insurance premiums are exceptionally high, primarily because the insurance company said, I can't build you another house that's like this one.
Right.
That's what they're running into here.
Right.
But the reality is, what they're saying here, as I understand it, and again, poorly written, if you don't fund it, we won't do it.
Yes, that's what they're saying.
And your point, valid, well, then how important is it to you?
Right. It's protecting the whole church from burning down. If you're really that concerned, you're going to find money somewhere else to do it.
Right. Yeah. Capital campaign,
correct.
Donations, whatever it is.
We may be approving that new fire truck, so they might just be okay because it's right next door to the fire
That's a valid point. It is right there. Now, the other part about this church, I'm going to go to a community advocate article. If you're not aware, back in 2020, there was an article because they removed the steeple and they wanted people not to be alarmed. The reason they removed it is because the church is home to antennas from the 4 major cellular companies, right? And housing them is a significant source of income for the church. Now, you can see the steeple removed on the left. There's cellular towers in the steeple, and on the right, there's additional towers highlighted in red, if you haven't noticed them, just above the clock there. Now, my argument on this is, okay, you're getting revenue from cell towers. The cell towers are creating magnetic fields which may or may not, right, cause a higher probability of a lightning strike. The cellular companies operating those towers are pretty, I would think, concerned about their asset being the towers and working, and would be worried about lightning. Have you gone to those who are paying you and asked, hey, I'm concerned about lightning. Any chance you think you could help fund lightning protection so that your antennas don't get blown up and everything else should there be a strike?
Yeah. It seems like it's a negotiation. right? But it seems like a valid one. Everybody loses if it gets struck by lightning, especially, well, obviously the church and the town from the point of view of the church's benefit, right? But then, of course, the cell towers are down, bad for business, and very costly to repair. So why wouldn't they go to the cellular carriers and say, how can we work this out? Maybe we get paid less. That's fair, right? They're doing extra work. What have they done in the past? Did they do any research to say cell towers are everywhere? They're probably in other old buildings. What happened there? What's happening? It's around the country. I guarantee they're in many, many churches because steeples are high.
It was in the one in Spencer that burned down.
There you go.
And one of the issues was that they had to bring in temporary towers to get cell service back up in town, because when it burned down, that area went dead.
So the question would be, hey, look what happened in Spencer, right? Maybe we should protect this together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Again, I'm not 100% opposed to this. I think they haven't done the thinking. It's sort of like, hey, there's free money from the town. Let's see if we can get it. Right. But I think the better option would be, you sort of should do your homework here. I agree. It's a pretty building. I think it is part of the history. You brought up, it's in our town seal. Didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
So it's important. But to this one, it's also little on the fence there.
Yeah, it's like when your kids come and they're like, hey, Mom, can I get like $10 to go to the ice cream? Go ask your father. It's like they didn't think to ask. It seems like a no-brainer to me.
And what's the revenue? Do they share the revenue with the town?
Yeah, I don't know.
Obviously not.
I think my major concern, like I said, I'm not completely averse to supporting, because we have money for historic buildings.
Yeah.
The problem I have with it is, are they now using the community preservation funds as a crutch to say I can defer maintenance because I know that the town is going to vote to give us money when we need it.
Yeah.
Instead of, because it's their building, town doesn't own it.
Right.
Right. Unless they want to go into some mutual, revenue sharing operation here, that we shouldn't have to fix everything that goes wrong just because it's an old building in town, especially when we don't own it. And
also, it's sort of, to be quite frank, that application is sort of like mailed in a bit. I mean, you wouldn't talk about the history of the church. You wouldn't talk about the benefit that it has. You wouldn't talk about, they use it for some community things, maybe, whatever, right? Sell it a little bit more.
Yeah. That application was, I'm embarrassed for whoever submitted that, because it just shows me that they really didn't care about what they were putting down there. I mean, if you really want the funds and you want the project approved,
a little bit of a dice roll, right? It was sort of like free money. Let's see if we can get it.
Yeah.
So I think we should look at this as a community. I guess my whole point on that is there's a lot of things. Other people have applied for a lot of them. I did actually go back and look.
Yeah.
Park rehabilitations, basketball courts in certain areas that have higher price points. And what I found is there's an aversion, because of how they break down from the committee, to spend the entire amount, let's say, in a given year on a single project. They'd rather split it up over smaller amounts and say kind of piecemeal it. However, I think as a community, we should also be thinking about, are there some larger projects we would want to fund and would be willing to save it for it?
Right.
And that's where I think that committee, that's the responsibility of the committee, to kind of look and seek those out and maybe bring some things to town meeting or potentially to get more funding. So like I said, I just think there should be some more due diligence on some of these to make sure that makes the most sense about where we're spending that money. I know we ultimately, we have it allocated, so we should spend it and try to keep things updated, but I think we need to make sure we're asking more questions on those. Yeah. So I guess with that, we've gone through the whole town meeting warrant, right? I think we've had actually a lot of yeses. There've been some no's. So I hope everybody out there, the town meeting members, are watching this. This will be indexed with chapters, so it'll be easily accessible as far as going back and referencing this at some point in time in the future. So I appreciate everybody listening tonight. And remember to look at your think sheets. We're going to go back to this. The Finance Committee will send this out again, I hope, in the packet. When making the decisions at town meeting, start to think about what the impact is on all of us as residents in Shrewsbury. So with that, I'm Greg Richards.
I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Caroline Maycumber, Precinct 9.
And we are the Unselects. We'll see you on our next episode.